What we'll be covering today is the introduction on the topic of advocacy. I'm pleased to welcome our colleagues at PwC who are going to tell us about their story in the advocacy space. And then, as often in these sessions, we'll then have some roundtable discussions really about how you as individuals and organisations can start to share and celebrate what you're doing in social mobility and really try and help drive that agenda, especially given the difficult year that we're all facing. And then we'll just come back together, and obviously the after pack then will be shared with you of what comes out of those sessions. So what as we always do is almost just give you that standing bar of what the social mobility means to us here at the Commission. So for us, social mobility is about that link between a person's occupation or income and that of their parents. So it's about ensuring that actually your background doesn't actually determine your future. And that's what we're coming from at the social mobility. Now, I know with a lot of the discussions you will be having at the moment about diversity, given what's been happening on lots of different areas, that we know that there's a purpose to have diversity in your businesses. We know that actually it helps with improved branding, and from our own research, 67% of candidates are actually seeking out diverse companies. So they're wanting to see diversity in organisations that they're applying for jobs. We know obviously it's great for well-being, and we know it's all about almost looking at future-proofing your organisation. And I think, again, given the challenges that all organisations are facing at the moment, now is almost that opportunity to actually think about what that workforce of the future could look like with the way that our way of working has changed and actually how job roles have changed. So we know that the most successful businesses in this place are actually looking at more progressive recruitment strategies and employment strategies, really where they're looking for hidden talent outside of their normal recruitment practices. So they can actually start to drive this innovation and problem-solving culture really to help represent their consumer base and community better, but also ultimately to succeed as an organisation. So I know yourselves on the call, and especially if you've been on a few of our other masterclasses, will be very aware of the importance of diversity, and that's why you're here today. And for us at the Social Mobility Commission, obviously, we're here all about driving that socio-economic diversity. And where this works well in terms of advocacy, for us it's about sharing your story and your data. So what we mean by that, it's not about getting on a soapbox and talking about the great work you do, although that is part of it, but it's also actually about that collaboration and supporting organisations that maybe aren't as far down the journey as you are, or that maybe don't have the resources that you have. So it's all about this shared collaboration and moving the social mobility movement forward. So there is an element of this internal piece, so having that commitment to your colleagues actually about what you want to do in this space and making sure that you have this active national voice. So you are talking about what you're doing in your organisation, warts and all, because the what part of those conversations is important because they're the learnings that other organisations can take forward. And having this leadership really drive this change. And for me, I almost feel it's like this orchestration of your employees around the social mobility story, what you're doing with your clients, because certainly sometimes your clients can actually bias how you yourselves work. So it's ensuring that you're working with your clients, stakeholders, suppliers, and collectively you are actually making a bolder, bigger impact. And a big visual I always have is it's about almost like a race, and it's not about who gets the gold medal in social mobility. I almost feel it's like the London Marathon, and I say this, I guess, because it happened in a very different way a few weeks ago, but in the London Marathon, no one probably remembers the person who got the gold medal, but what they remember is all that camaraderie, and the person who wore the strangest outfit or took the longest time, but it's all those differences in businesses coming together, but actually your shared mission is to improve social mobility. And to me, and here at the Social Mobility Commission, that is really what advocacy is all about. And when it's done well, it really can truly empower people. So this is a lady, Jessica, who comes from a working class background, and she's actually works for PwC. And for her, she found that working in an organisation like PwC, she's actually gone off and set and is the founder and chair of their social mobility network. So here is a wonderful example of actually she herself coming from a working class background, and she wanted to really continue that drive of inclusivity in PwC and hence set up this social mobility network. So that's a great platform that she's had to be able to do that. And I think I've already demonstrated this a little bit, but for me, it's very much about this symbiotic relationship. So what you do internally, i.e. your commitment as an organisation, so having that board level commitment and the business approval to do that. In a number of our other workshops, we've already talked about the support of intervention. So it's about having that wider network. So the champions or the channels of communication. So the shared language and understanding of social mobility is there. And this is all underpinned by this data piece. So we've got this movement of social mobility within internally. And what you're then doing is actually taking this external. So what I would stress is you don't have to do it all. You don't have to have an all singing or dancing story to then feel like you can go external and talk about it. Part of it is actually having that commitment almost as part of that board agreement. So if you're agreeing to actually, this is one of the areas we're going to work on in our organisation, actually let's talk about it publicly. So having those targets from the onset and talking about that publicly and publishing those. So again, internally, individuals know that actually it's not just an internal commitment, you're externally making that commitment. And your leaders are there seeking out opportunities to talk about the work that you do internally, but also trying to move the movement really around social mobility and this inclusivity on socioeconomic diversity. And hence part of that is then this collaboration. So working with others, with competitors, with smaller organisations, with third parties in the sector, really to try and draw on people's ideas so collectively we can actually start to improve things. And a big part of that will obviously then filter through to sectors. And where we need to almost underpin all of this is making sure that we have this level of understanding. So what we don't want to do is assume that people understand what social mobility is. And actually, since I came over onto my secondment at the Social Mobility Commission, I've come up time and time again of people actually not quite understanding what it means. So we need to make sure that everyone within the organisation has an understanding of what you mean around socioeconomic diversity and what are those parameters that you're looking at when it comes to success. And from that, you will then start to get a shared language. So individuals feel more comfortable about having a conversation about socioeconomic diversity and inclusion. And this class barrier, or this conversation, actually we can start to chip away at that awkwardness. So we should never assume that individuals want to feel comfortable talking about it, but also understand the importance of it. And often I found this year, more so than most, there's almost been this challenge around diversity and socioeconomic diversity and gender and ethnicity because of what's happened so much in I suppose 2020 with COVID and the impacts in America, that actually what we need to understand is social mobility is part of that D&I agenda. And so it's not about having confusion or confliction between this, it's about a wider diversity agenda and socioeconomic diversity being part of that. So we cannot assume that individuals, it's not to swap something else, it's something that is part of a wider thing we're doing. And when this is done well, it actually can start to inform and shape a sector. So JAL are a perfect example of an organisation that actually have helped change the face of their sector. So they recognised way back in 2014 that they needed to change the property sector. It was very white, middle class, male dominated, and they wanted to change this. So they actually sought about an initiative about changing the face of property and worked with a number of other firms across the sector. And they themselves also have a research programme that they do where other organisations can actually use that intelligence to help inform their own agendas. And they're actually changing how property is with regards to diversity. But it doesn't just take a business to do this. Individuals can also do this. And there's a lady, Laura, who is now the Chief People Officer at PwC, but she herself came from a low socioeconomic background. And she actually had the drive to want to make to make a change for all the people who'd said, actually, no, you can't do that type of thing. And she was fortunate enough to go to university and be successful in a role with PwC. But actually, because she realises that not everyone will have that internal drive or those opportunities from a low socioeconomic background that she had, that actually she has increased what PwC do with regards to low socioeconomic diversity. And I will leave now Holly to explore a lot further on that. But again, there's this constant evolving of actually someone or an organisation can actually, the more they talk about it and share their ideas, can actually help inform others to make that change. And it is this continual symbiotic relationship. So I'm glad that you're all here to be a part of this and obviously continually start to talk about the work that you're doing. Now, as I mentioned, Holly is here from PwC, so I shall pass over to Holly so she can tell you a lot more about the work that herself and Laura and the rest of the team at PwC are doing.
Fab, that's great, thanks Nina. So hi everyone, it's brilliant to have been asked to present today on advocacy, and I'm really looking forward to sharing our story with you and then hearing a lot more from you in the breakout sessions as well. I'm Holly Crampton and I'm the social mobility lead for PwC, as Nina mentioned. I've been at PwC for 16 years and I actually joined on the audit school leaver scheme in our Manchester office, and have since done a range of different roles across audit, recruitment and learning development. I now lead our social mobility team, which is part of our wider inclusion, community and wellbeing team. For anyone on the session who hasn't come across PwC before, we're a professional services firm and we provide services for clients including audit, tax, advisory, consulting and technology. We were ranked #1 in the 2019 Social Mobility Employer Index. We're still very much on a journey with our work on social mobility, and we've got lots more to do and lots more we'd like to achieve. But we are a fair way on with that journey, and some of the things we're doing and we're going to talk about in this presentation are best practice and would sit within the optimising section of the Social Mobility Commission's toolkit. So if you're an employer who's earlier on in your journey, please don't be put off by thinking that you need to do all of this. As Nina mentioned earlier, you don't have to be a large organisation to make a difference, and every organisation of every size can make a difference in their individual interactions. So if we could move to the next slide, please, Nina. Fab. So our social mobility journey started long before I was in post in the social mobility team and before 2017 when PwC created the social mobility team and the strategy. We were involved in activity areas such as recruitment and community engagement, but this wasn't necessarily joined up or part of an overarching strategy or approach prior to 2017. We got involved with Access Accountancy in 2014 as a founding signatory. And for those who are aware of Access Accountancy, it's a collaboration of more than 25 professional services firms and a number of professional bodies dedicated to improving access to the accountancy profession in the UK. All Access Accountancy signatories commit to providing work placements to students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. The number of placements they commit to is 1% of the workforce. Collecting and monitoring socioeconomic background data of applicants and hires on a biannual basis, and that analysis of data is the most comprehensive collation of socioeconomic diversity data across any sector globally. They also commit to taking part in externally validated reviews of Access Accountancy and in generating interest in the accountancy profession by delivering common messages in social mobility target schools and colleges. Access Accountancy are also more recently focusing on progression within the profession as well. We're also now involved with another cross-sector collaboration, RISE, which we've been working on together with the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales and the other Big Six accountancy firms to increase access and inclusivity for all professions through enhancing aspirations for all young people. The project is really designed to help disadvantaged young people to access the support and training needed to be successful in life and in their careers, irrespective of the starting point and irrespective of which career they want to pursue, whether that be in professional services or not. Access Accountancy and RISE involve collaborating with other employers within our sector on outreach, improving diversity, engaging in debate and also helping to drive positive change. The creation of our social mobility team back in 2017 really kick-started the journey that we've been on over the last few years. The team wouldn't have been created without the support of leadership, and we're really lucky to have leaders like Laura, who Nina mentioned earlier, who drive our social mobility agenda massively and are very supportive of and passionate about our focus on it. Social mobility is very much a priority of our board. We appreciate that not all organisations will have the level of resources needed to create a full-time dedicated team in this area, but we do recommend having a strategy and a way of measuring accountability, and senior level support is absolutely key. Our social mobility vision at PwC is to lead by example as a social mobility employer and to be recognised as an inclusive organisation where people from all backgrounds can work, develop and succeed, and to use our skills and resources to enable people from disadvantaged backgrounds across the UK to make the most of their potential, whether that's at PwC or elsewhere. We developed a 5-year strategy which has approval from our board and firm's leadership and covers activities relating to recruitment, development and progression, communities and advocacy. It includes a range of targets relating to both our work internally and our work with our communities, and we hold ourselves accountable by publishing data on our progress every year in our social mobility scorecard, which sits within our annual report. Our current metrics include percentage of new hires who receive free school meals whilst at school, the target for which is the national benchmark of 15%, workplace experiences provided for disadvantaged young people supported with workplace skills development, amongst others. We're currently reviewing and updating our metrics, and from next year we'll be including workforce data as well as data on new hires. We're hoping to be able to publish hires and workforce data on free school meals and parental occupation. We feel it's really important to publish not just our targets, but also the progress against them each year to really help hold ourselves accountable. We also report on our applications and hires by socioeconomic background and work experience placement delivery through our involvement with Access Accountancy. And we've published our 5-point social mobility action plan on our website and update our progress against this regularly. When the social mobility team was created, we reviewed the socioeconomic background questions relating to the data that we were asking both our applicants and hires and our workforce, and we found that these weren't consistent. So we then updated the questions to reflect the Cabinet Office recommended measures of socioeconomic background, which are the same ones that can now be found in the Social Mobility Commission's Employer Toolkit. We have found getting data on our workforce a struggle, and we know that it's something that many other employers struggle with too. In the last year or so, we've worked really hard to improve the level of data we have from around 35% disclosure to over 80% now on some measures. And we've done this by incorporating the survey into our annual compliance process, launching a firm-wide survey that was sent out by our Chief People Officer, Laura, and linking to the survey from every social mobility related internal news article that we share with staff. Now we've got a lot more data on our workforce, we're hoping to work with University College London, who we already work with on the Access to the Professions project, on a review of our workforce data, so that we can better understand the composition of our workforce in terms of key characteristics and look at career outcomes and trajectories from employees from different groups to show any potential barriers to progression and to allow us to further investigate and explore those. Initially, our social mobility team, when it was set up, was part of our corporate sustainability team. 2 years ago, we moved to become part of the wider inclusion, community and wellbeing team. So we now work much more closely with our colleagues working on the wider diversity and inclusion. We feel it's really important to learn from what's been done on the more established areas of diversity like gender and ethnicity, and for socioeconomic background to be considered in everything we do as a team on inclusion, so learning from each other. We approach all areas of diversity in a really holistic way, and as I said, the two areas of the team work very closely together. We actively share our story, and today's an example of that, and we contribute to and learn from the wider ecosystem around social mobility. So we're a founding member of the Department for Opportunity and actively support their campaigns to improve diversity, such as the most recent one, CVs Aren't Working. We're the professional services sector lead for the Social Mobility Pledge, and we collaborated with the Pledge team to develop a report aimed at sharing information on what businesses can do to help advance opportunities for people from all backgrounds. The report was launched at an event in November 2019 with over 20 organisations attending. We're involved with the Employers Social Mobility Alliance, who aim to promote collaboration between employers, the state and the third sector to address the issues faced by those from low-income backgrounds entering the workforce. And we partner with a number of organisations such as the Sutton Trust, the Social Mobility Foundation, Upreach and Teach First, amongst many others, to increase our reach and to ensure we're engaging with a more diverse audience. When coming up with our new social mobility metrics, we consulted with a number of social mobility organisations and charities, including the Social Mobility Commission, who've been massively helpful, and we're working with the Commission to provide feedback on their proposed sector-specific measures, which they'll be publishing soon. We're really keen to share our experience to support other organisations with their social mobility work. We were panellists at the launch of the Social Mobility Commission's Employer Toolkit, both in London and Bradford. We've spoken with organisations who've actually approached us to share information on our work, and we've met with a number of organisations more recently regarding our Social Mobility Champions Network, which they were really keen to replicate. We've presented at a number of events, including this one, with Parlion, the Parliament Opportunity and Workplace Equality Network, the City of London Lord Mayor's Appeal Power of Inclusion events, and the Dodds Advancing Social Mobility in the Workplace conference. Our Social Mobility Network, which Jess leads, as Nina mentioned earlier, was launched in 2019. It has over 1,600 members, including 80 champions and 12 partner ambassadors, all of whom are advocates for social mobility both internally and externally. The network offers access to mentoring from leadership and an opportunity to connect with colleagues through networking, formal events and regular online engagement. The network is a pool for thought leadership on relevant issues, challenges and opportunities, and monthly network meetings include a section highlighting key findings and research carried out by organisations focusing on social mobility. Staff are also encouraged to share their social mobility stories where they feel comfortable, and we feature the stories of several PwC employees online and internally, running a series of social mobility stories, including those from senior partners. Our client-facing diversity and inclusion consulting team supports a variety of clients with a range of issues, including social mobility. More of our clients now want to talk to our internal social mobility team to understand about the issue, how PwC is working to address it, and to understand what they can do. These two teams are really well connected, which makes sure that our internal and client work inform each other. We engage with our suppliers on sustainability and diversity, so we include questions and invitations to tender to understand our prospective suppliers' approach in relation to diversity, equality and community engagement. We're a founding member of the Social Enterprise UK Buy Social Corporate Challenge, and we've made a commitment to buy more from social enterprises because they employ and support more people from disadvantaged groups. We organise annual supplier forums focusing on underrepresented groups to share knowledge and to help our suppliers adopt more sustainable practices. We also sponsor and run Growing Talent, which is a multi-employer into-work programme that we also use for recruiting our support staff. We're a cornerstone employer in the Bradford opportunity area and recently opened a new office in the heart of the city, and our Leeds office senior partner sits on the board of the Bradford Opportunity Area Partnership. We meet with other employers in Bradford to understand their perspectives and to encourage them to engage with the partnership's goals. We've brought on board other cornerstone employers, directly impacting the number of employer encounters with students and the diversity of employers. So now I've told you about our journey, I wanted to summarise some of our key focus areas going forward. So if we could move to the next slide, please, Nina. Fab, thank you. So here you can see our advocacy aim, which is to advocate the importance of increased social mobility, both internally and externally, be transparent about the impact of our strategy and collaborate with others. I've also highlighted here some of our key focus areas going forward in relation to internal and external advocacy, and as Nina said earlier, the relationship between the two. So internally, we really want to be able to continue to develop our social mobility story series and to highlight role models, increase the amount of socioeconomic background data we hold on our people even further, analyse this and be able to address any areas of concern. And work really closely with the established social mobility network now to maximise the impact of our initiatives. Externally, we aim to continue to contribute to the wider ecosystem, learn from that ecosystem and share our story, continue to collaborate with others, use more of our social mobility story series externally, and continue our role as a cornerstone employer in the Bradford opportunity area. Could move to the next slide, please, Nina. So here, I wanted to share with you some of our lessons learned along the way. As Nina said before, it's sort of warts and all, and we're definitely still on our journey, but the journey isn't always simple or easy. So as I said, we found getting data on our workforce really challenging, and we know that lots of other organisations have as well. What's really helped us is being very transparent about what we need the data for, how we're going to use it, and how it's going to be reported on, and asking for data as much as you can and incorporating the questions or the survey into a formal annual process like we did with our compliance process really helps. Collaboration with other organisations is absolutely key, as obviously this problem is not going to be solved by one organisation or one group of people alone. As Nina said earlier, we're not competing in this area. This isn't an area of competition. We're all working towards the same goal of increased social mobility. And when collaborating with other employers, you do need to be mindful of the objectives of the other organisations and make sure that obviously the collaboration is shared by all the organisations involved. It's really important, as I mentioned earlier, to learn from other areas of diversity. So social mobility is a newer area of diversity and inclusion. So learning from areas such as gender and ethnicity is really important. It's a very broad agenda, so it will need input from across the business. You can't just have a centralised social mobility or centralised D&I team solving all the challenges. Everyone's got a role to play, from thinking about who they're recruiting, what they're paying them, who they're choosing to work with, who they're choosing for assignments and projects, through to who they're giving a promotion or a pay increase to. And we need to keep this really front of mind. And finally, moving on to the next slide. So we appreciate that lots of organisations will be earlier on than we are in their journeys on social mobility. But if you're starting out and wondering where to start and what to do first, here are the key things that you can consider to really make a difference. So the first one is have a really clear strategy and make sure that strategy is supported by senior leadership. So find your senior advocate. Have someone, whether that's a team or an individual who has it as part of their role, responsible for delivering on social mobility. Identify your role models, and some of your role models, you might not know are from disadvantaged backgrounds as yet. So identify those role models within your business and encourage them to share their stories and share their background with others. Gather socioeconomic background data to better understand your diversity, and then obviously be able to take action on that. Publish targets and progress against them. Collaborate with other organisations, and do be vocal on the topic. As Nina said earlier, it doesn't matter what stage of your journey you're at, do be prepared to present at events and share your story for others to learn from. So I think that's it for my presentation, but I do look forward to hearing more from others in the breakout sessions as well. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Holly. And I'm pleased to say that we do have some time for some questions. So if anybody from our participants have some questions that they'd like to put forward, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question to Holly, then we've got some time for some questions directed to Holly and the work that they've done in this space. Rachel, has there anything come through on the chat, or shall we open it up to individuals to ask a question?
Cliff has asked, are the published targets you mentioned the 5-point plan on your website?
So that's the 5-point plan, which is a little bit different from the metrics that I mentioned. So if you want to see the metrics and the targets and progress associated with those, if you Google PwC non-financial scorecard, that's the section of our annual report that those targets sit in. So you will be able to see on there all of our sustainability targets, our community targets, and also our social mobility scorecard as well. But the 5-point plan is obviously part of our targets too.
Brilliant, thank you. Any others on the chat, Rachel?
There's no more on the chat.
Anybody would want to ask a question to Holly while we have her?
Yes, please, if it's possible. My name's Gareth Jenkins from the Government Legal Department. I'm a lawyer and our membership secretary for our Social Mobility Network.
Hi, Gareth.
Hello. Sorry to disturb everyone, but I just wondered, do you think organisations, as a very general question, could do more on social mobility? If so, what?
Yeah, absolutely, and that includes us. You know, as I said, we're still on our journey. There's definitely more that we can be doing, and there's definitely more that we want to be doing. And I think in terms of, you know, what organisations can do, advocacy and what we've talked about today is a great start. And the other areas of our strategy that we really want to you know, continue to focus on and make a difference on are around recruitment. And obviously there've been previous Social Mobility Commission events on these topics. So working with the recruitment team to make sure that we're really recruiting a diverse group of people into the firm. Development and progression. And development and progression, I think, is one that, you know, organisations are maybe further behind on than they are with some of the other areas, such as recruitment, that they've been focusing on for longer. So making sure that people have got the opportunity to develop within your organisation, no matter what background they're from. And then finally, community. So, you know, we really want to make a big difference in our community activities. Obviously, quite a lot of that has had to be pivoted to be virtual for the time being. But yeah, those are sort of the 4 key areas that I think organisations can focus on, including advocacy.
Thank you very much, and I'm loving the course. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Gareth.
you, Gareth. Thank you, Holly. I'll just pipe into that one as well, actually, Gareth. I think from our side, given what's happened this year, it's a prime time for organisations almost to rethink what the workforce will look like. I mean, we've had so much change forced upon us because of the coronavirus, that now is almost that opportune moment to actually start looking at your recruitment practices and your policies and processes, and actually thinking, okay, well, now what does our workforce look like? How can we embrace the digital change which has been forced upon us? And actually, what do those jobs look like? So, you know, where can we offer more remote working? Where can it be more flexible? Where, given these changes, you then can be looking at a broader potential of workforce, so you're not restricted to where your offices are. You can think broader piece, which obviously will help socioeconomic diversity, because individuals from socioeconomic backgrounds are least likely to move away from their, you know, their home environment. So that will help. And I mean, not to advertise what we do, but obviously if you go on to socialmobilityworks.org, and I'll share with you at the end of the masterclass, but certainly there's lots of advice that organisations can do given the impact of COVID-19, but also from our own employers toolkit, which goes everything from outreach, hiring, all the way through to, as Holly said, about in the progression space. Thank you, Gareth. I think that's a question we can take through to the rooms as well, actually. Is there any other questions before we go out to have some broader discussions around advocacy in our roundtables?
There's a couple here. So there's a question from Sue. What are your quick wins for organisations with limited resource?
So I'm not sure there's any quick wins, as in, you know, really quick and easy things to do. But I do think that there are some things that are, you know, maybe things that you can do sort of earlier on in your journey. So I think finding your senior advocate And that isn't always, you know, finding somebody who's a senior advocate who might be from a disadvantaged background themselves isn't always easy, because often people that have sort of got to the top of organisations might have, you know, spent a number of years trying to hide their background for whatever reason, however they feel about that. So really encouraging your senior level staff to share their backgrounds, talk about it, and then identifying both your role models and your really senior advocates within your organisation. Setting yourself a strategy, and I think you know, Nina mentioned the Social Mobility Commission Employer Toolkit. That would be where I would start. If I didn't have a strategy, I would go straight to that document and think about the different areas where I was able to really set some targets and to make a change within my organisation as a bit more of a quick win. I hope that answers that, Sue.
Thank you, Holly.
Thank you.
There's just one more question as well, which was, how do you get people filling out the social mobility forms, as this is not compulsory?
Yeah, and thanks for that question. It's definitely not easy. So we've done a lot of work around this over the past year, as I mentioned, and we have been able to massively increase our disclosure rate, but we've had to really chip away at it. So we link through to the survey from everything social mobility related on our internal news site, and we publish stories on a monthly basis to make sure that we're being able to refer back to that survey. We actually got agreement, which is rare at somewhere like PwC, for our Chief People Officer Laura Hinton, who sits on the exec board, to send a firm-wide email with a link to the survey, which we hardly ever get approval for, and that made a real difference. And then finally, with the compliance survey, what we did is incorporated the survey into the compliance. So it's not mandatory for people to have to disclose their socioeconomic background, but you can obviously make it mandatory for people to say, I prefer not to share this information, or I prefer not to disclose this information, for them to actually go on to the survey. So we included the survey as a question within our compliance return to basically say, have you completed your socioeconomic background data? People could answer no if they preferred not to disclose, but equally lots of them then went on to complete it. So I think it is really about trying to incorporate it into some sort of annual disclosure, and I know not all organisations will have the same compliance processes as we do, but trying to incorporate into that, trying to get senior level staff to advocate for people completing it, really explaining why you want it. So I think, you know, you do sometimes get challenges back around, well, you know, what's this got to do with, you know, what we're doing within the firm, and, you know, what does my data from when I was 14 impact in terms of, you know, what your strategy is going to be. And I think it's about being prepared to answer those questions and being really clear on the fact that you want it, so you can make your place of work a fairer place to work for everyone. So yeah, that's sort of how we've gone about it.
Brilliant, thank you, Holly. Any others, Rachel?
Yep, Rachel asks, how are you doing outreach on recruitment activities now?
Fab, good question. Thanks, Rachel. So we've actually moved all our engagement with young people for certainly the next couple of terms, if not the whole academic year, to be virtual. So we work very closely with our recruitment team, and we do have our social mobility outreach team as well. So we do a range of different virtual activities online, some of which are one-off, and sort of students and teachers and careers leaders are able to dip in and out. But our flagship programme for this term is going to be a programme called New World, New Skills School Series, and that's available to all secondary schools with a higher than average proportion of students in receipt of free school meals, which is publicly available Department for Education data that you can pull from the website. And we're actually in the process of promoting that programme now, and it's going to be a 6-week skills series. So we'll be covering a different skill each week, and then we'll be setting the students an optional challenge as well. And what we've done with that programme is we've tried to make it as flexible as possible for teachers, because we're very conscious that obviously teachers and schools have got a lot to deal with, particularly this term sort of settling back in. So we've tried to make it as flexible as possible. They can use the resources online, they can play the videos back each week at a time that suits them. So we're just really trying to do as much as we can virtually, but really trying to make it as flexible as we can, and also as linked to the curriculum and mapped to the Gatsby benchmarks as we possibly can, to make it as attractive to careers leaders and teachers when obviously they've got, you know, lots of other conflicting priorities.
And Holly, thank you for that. I'm just going to ask a second question. So is that something that you are doing, connecting with schools, or are you going through a partner to connect with the schools with that?
So we do both. So we've got partner organisations that we work with. So I mentioned some of them on the undergraduate and graduate side. On the school side, we work with organisations like Uptree, Ahead Partnership, Social Mobility Business Partnership, and we do a bit of both. So we'll do events with those organisations, we'll do activities with those organisations. Those organisations will help to promote our programme that we're actually running, you know, as PwC. And then also we'll go directly to schools as well. So we do have a number of schools contacts, but we also have a number of enterprise coordinator and local council contacts as well, who we find you know, are absolutely fantastic in being able to push out messages about what employers are doing to schools.
Brilliant, thank you, Holly. Rachel, we've probably got time for one other if there's another question. If not, we'll go to the breakout rooms.
There was actually a couple. Cheryl would like to know, there was mention of the campaign about CVs don't work. Where can she find more detail on this? And the second question was a return from Cliff, which was saying your previous slide refers to awkwardness about discussing social class. Do you find the term lower social economic background a barrier to understanding? Is class an easier concept?
Okay, fab. So I'll start with Cheryl's. The CVs Aren't Working campaign was a Department for Opportunity campaign, which we supported as a founding member of the Department for Opportunity. So if you want to find out more about that, Cheryl, if you go to the Department for Opportunity website, there's lots of information on there regarding, you know, what employers can do about their recruitment processes and their CVs, and how they assess those to be able to make that process fairer. And then moving on to Cliff's question, I think this is a difficult one, and I think class isn't. I think there's issues with class as well as a concept and as a term, and I'm not sure whether it is, and Nina might be able to help me here, but in the back of the Social Mobility Commission's Employer Toolkit, there's some sort of terms that are used around socioeconomic background, social mobility, and potentially class, and you know, some narrative in there as to what some of the challenges are with some of those terms. I think socioeconomic background, obviously sometimes a bit of a mouthful, isn't sort of always widely understood, but I think it's about educating people as to what that means. And you know, if you can describe the measures that are used, and you know what the term actually means, I think you know, we tend to use that instead of the term class. But I don't know, Nina, if you've got anything to add to that around class.
I suppose that the reason why I alluded to it in the call is that often if people don't understand the phraseology of socioeconomic diversity, they will immediately jump to, okay, well, is this a class conversation? And so it's just having that conversation and freeing people to have that conversation about the fact that, no, what we're not talking about is class battles. What we're talking about is opportunities for all, regardless of your background. And so as long as people have a full understanding of what you as an organisation mean by socioeconomic diversity, it will free that conversation up, and then people will realise about, actually, we're not talking about class, we're talking about social mobility, of which obviously class is part of that, but it's not all of that. Great, thank you, Holly, and thank you for standing up to all of those questions that were thrown at you, and none of which were planted. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go out to our roundtable discussions. Obviously, I appreciate social mobility is such a huge topic, and it obviously starts from outreach all the way through. But as we've mentioned before, this masterclass is on advocacy, so I'm hoping that we can have some great discussions around what you and your organisations can do in this space. So my esteemed colleague Rachel will send us out into various rooms so we can talk about how we're going to tackle this, and then we'll come back together and share some of those insights before we finish. So Rachel, over to you, the master on the buttons.
Thank you.
There we go. I couldn't get into my little bar. Apologies for that. That was a technological challenge for me, not Zoom. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed those discussions. So I just wanted to go to a couple of our facilitators to share some of the views that came forward. Julia, do you want to take the stage?
Yeah, I can. We had a really good discussion. A few topics came up. One really big one around geography and recruitment, and how the digital way of working, which you alluded to, Nina, earlier, is kind of changing things, and really seizing the opportunity to push that agenda further. The Social Mobility Business Partnership got a lot of good praise. So as a place for people to join in and get support and sort of recognition, and also a sort of legitimacy to carry this this agenda further. We also talked a little bit about kind of very specialist roles in the legal profession, for example, that are really technical, and different routes. So we went off the advocacy topic a little bit at that stage, but it was still all good and important, and lots of good problem solving around how to address that. And then finally, we talked quite a lot about engagement with young people, and role models that are relatable, as well as kind of the overall impact engagement with young people before, whether that's around an apprenticeship or a work experience day, hosting that in your organization can really kind of impact people's thinking in the way that they start to think about social mobility internally. But for some people also, it might give them the confidence to share their own story if they have one,
Yes,
around their own social mobility journey, and that being a really powerful way in to make people a bit more comfortable and open, and hopefully engaged and committed to carry it forward.
Yeah, we had a similar point just around the role model piece. So it's interesting that it came up in your room as well. And Janice, are there anything else from your room that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, sorry to just jump in there, Nina. Could you share your slides, please?
Oh, I thought I was. I am sorry. My screen for some reason has gone funny, and it now thinks it's sharing. Start again. There we go. Is that working now?
Yes, can see that.
See about technology? Anyway, so Janice.
Hi. Our group had some great discussions, and I think the main thing we were talking about was data gathering, and just how difficult that can be, but also how easy it is for the younger people, because they're used to giving that kind of information to universities, so they're really versed in it and don't really mind sharing that and revealing who they are. But there's also a sense that with older people that have been in organisations for a long time, they need to see action, they need to see it being acted on, otherwise cynicism grows and people wonder what's the point of it. And so we talked about having ambassadors to share the message, and also the strength of stories and role models. That was something that was really spoken about, and also the fact of creating a safe space for people to talk. Somebody gave an example of, in their organisation, they had a chat room that was just, let's talk about race, and why not have something similar for social mobility where people can join in if they want to, it's not compulsory. And also about getting leaders to understand. So people talked about when leaders met people from different social mobility groups, that they learned about them, and then they were able to advocate with a genuine heart, because they found the process really enriching and engaging, and so they learned from being in those environments. So they were the main things from our.
That's great, Janice. And I think to that point, there's an example of an organisation in the States, I think it might be UPS, where they actually will take their senior leaders to spend time out working on the streets, actually, so they can actually see the reality of different people's lives, because they are so disconnected from that. It makes their advocacy so much stronger. So it's interesting that came out in your call, in your conversation as well, Janice.
And also,
so thank you.
Sorry, and the last thing to say is that social mobility is invisible.
Yes.
Unlike gender or race. So yeah.
No, that's very true, very true. Well, thank you, Julia and Janice, obviously for facilitating those discussions, and we had some great rich discussions in our room, a lot of which you've covered about the internal piece, but we also brushed a little bit about the external challenges, and maybe actually some cultural challenges in different countries when talking about race externally and things like that, and social mobility externally. That was some interesting points. So thank you, everybody, for joining us in those discussions. As always, we will say the next step. So we will send out an advocacy pack. So if you've been part of our other masterclasses, you'll be aware you'll get an advocacy pack out, which is literally almost like a checklist, a guide of what we feel you could be doing in this space to almost make you think whether you're doing as much as you can do when it comes to advocacy. You'll get the PwC case study, which we've talked about, and obviously, please, if you've enjoyed today, sign up to our next masterclass, which is the 12th of November, and that was on progression, which we've already alluded to is almost one of those real hard nuts to crack. We've got lots of great work happening when people are coming into an organisation, but actually to enable those individuals to be successful is quite a difficult one, and the Ministry of Justice is going to talk to us about how they've managed to do it. So in summary from ourselves, and I feel like I shouldn't really steal these words, but he's a great man, and I almost feel this is a great strapline. So for us, it's about being the change you seek, and it can be as small and as you want, or massive, soapbox conversation. But really, when it comes to advocacy, you as an individual can actually start to make that change through social media. So please use our hashtags and feel free to share from today's discussions, but I really hope that you found the discussions we've had useful, and that you actually are starting to see advocacy in a slightly different light, and the work that you're going to do in social mobility, whether it's a network or whether it's more in outreach, you could actually just take that a little bit broader and start to share that story and communicate with your community a little bit more, and all of a sudden you've then got this advocacy piece where more of us are starting to join the movement of change. And my only summary would be, we know that we've had a real tough, or we are in a real difficult year, and it won't stop at the end of this year, it will continue, but please don't let the impact of COVID-19 have a massive impact on social mobility. The gap is widening, so the more that you can do in this space to make that change and help those from a socio-economic background difference would be awesome. So thank you everyone for joining us. That's the end of our masterclass, and we will get the after pack out to you within the week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nina. That was superb.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.